Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our March webinar titled Community Engagement. My name is Chris Hawks. I'm a training specialist for AmeriCorps VISTA and a returned Peace Corps volunteer serving in Belize from 2010 to 12. I'll be your host for today's webinar. You will also see our webinar support team, LSI, monitoring the chat and Q&A throughout the presentation or helping with any technical difficulties you may have. And today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Sarah Gleason. Sarah works as an independent consultant focused on building capacity for social change. She also serves as adjunct faculty in the Nonprofit Leadership Master's Degree Program at the University of Denver. Sarah has been part of the National Service family since serving as a Peace Corps volunteer, fellow RPCV, shout out Sarah, in the 1980s, and has also directed AmeriCorps State and AmeriCorps VISTA programs in her home state of Minnesota. We're very happy to have Sarah join us, and I'll pass it to her in just a second. Before doing so, just want to take a quick look at our agenda. So quickly, today, we will spend most of our time focusing on what community engagement is and really focusing on how to identify asset-based strategies that you can use to engage with your community. So with that, we'll dive right in and I'll pass it to Sarah. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And hi, everyone. It's great to be with you today, especially talking about one of my very favorite topics, both as a longtime practitioner and as a field that I learn and teach about. I'm passionate about community engagement because at its best, it's about empowerment, about communities having voice and agency in shaping their own future. So what do I even mean by community engagement, you might ask, which is a good question. It's a big concept. There's multiple definitions in different contexts. But for our purposes today, I've got a pretty straightforward definition to offer. Community engagement for us means involving and centering community members in planning, carrying out, and sustaining VISTA projects. This is a specific definition, but it's actually also broad ways of thinking about community engagement. It includes both what you'll often hear called public participation, which is an arena of engagement that focuses particularly on involving community in problem solving and decision making. And it also includes beyond that to working collaboratively with community to address issues that affect their well-being, which is more of a kind of public health or community organizing way of understanding community engagement. And of course, right there in the name of community engagement is a term that's always difficult to define, yet central to what you do as VISTA members, and that is community. Your VISTA project might define its community in different ways. It could be by, shared geography, or shared identities, or shared experiences or circumstances, or perhaps some combination of these. Ask yourself, what or who is the community for you and your project? I'm sure that's something you've been thinking hard about from the beginning. And here, to do community engagement well, you need to be thinking specifically about the who. Who is the community, or who are the community members that you want or need to engage with? Is it, for example, the residents of a particular region or a neighborhood? Or it might be more specific, like families of school-aged kids in that neighborhood, or families experiencing food insecurity, or refugee families, or within that East African families, or within that East African women. Who is it for you? For best effectiveness, try to be as specific as you can in naming the community you want to engage with. I hope you're already doing that in your heads and also with your teams when you're not on the webinar. If you already have multiple communities in mind that you want to engage, for the purpose of this webinar, it may help to focus on just one. And I'm going to turn it now to Chris for a little chat question.
Thanks, Sarah. So we are pretty sure you came to this webinar for a reason you're here for this specific topic on community engagement. So let me ask you, why does community engagement matter for you or for your VISTA project? There may be many reasons for this, and this will be pretty quick on the chat, but we'd like to hear at least one from you. So we ask that you take a second, think about it. It could be a couple of words, a couple of sentences, whatever you prefer, and just remember to toggle your chat response so that you're sending it to everyone. That way everyone here can view the responses. Give it a second to check the responses coming in. I'm sure it will start going fast very quickly. Looking at a few, building connections to the community, important for our project and vital for our needs. Nakoma works for a community museum, which strives to be designed for, by, and with community members in every aspect. So it's essential for the museum in that aspect. Totally understandable. Let's see, Emily, without community members, we would not be able to take on the projects that we do. And volunteers are essential to our organization. So yeah, if you're working with volunteers and recruiting volunteers, absolutely, it's gonna be vital, right? Oh yeah, these responses are coming in fast. So just, yeah, sifting through, I encourage you to read through these as well. But you know, a lot of it has to do with building relationships, providing resources, let's see, getting input on the issues, because the issues can change and can change rapidly. Love it. I love coming in. Looking for farmers in the community, says Carla. Recruiting volunteers, I'm seeing quite a bit of. Directly engages communities with lived experience of homelessness to be involved in decisions that affect them. Nothing about us without us. Love how that's phrased, Brianna. These are great. Please keep these coming. Love the responses and definitely appreciate your participation and contributing to the conversation. You know, it's great to hear how community engagement really matters for you and your project. I'll pass it to Sarah, and just Sarah, quickly, I just want to check it if any, I know the chat is moving fast, but any that really stand out for you before moving on?
Well, there was one of these later ones here that I was just really appreciating about the residents are the ones who have been impacted and they deserve to be at the forefront of the change and decision making. Absolutely. I believe that's the only way we actually can address these problems, is if they are right at the center and at the forefront. Yeah. So, okay, this is great. In fact, I was trying to write down all these, but your answers about why it matters to you hit pretty much all of the high level points that I'd want to make about why community engagement matters. So I think we can just run through these bullet points real quick, because you essentially named all of them. Community engagement can be important because it can create and strengthen relationships. Several of you talked about that, relationships and connections. And those can be both individual and organizational. And they can be, you know, between you and the community or within the community. It can help you and your organization or your project understand what the community wants and needs. Many of you named that is really crucial to your project, is understanding what they actually want and need. And this is how you do it. It can also strengthen community ownership of your project. A number of you talked about that and the many ways that community sustains your project. It can build capacity, and I heard that in here too, building community capacity for your project and beyond. It can connect and mobilize community assets. It can empower community members to shape their own futures. And finally, I believe that community engagement is crucial to the sustainability of VISTA projects. I don't see how we really can talk about sustainability in VISTA without talking about community engagement. I'm going to add one more thing about why I'm here, and from what I've seen in your chat here, why it sounds like many of you are too. And that is, I strive to make everything I do come from an asset-based approach or perspective. And that basically means knowing or believing that the people we serve and work with have many strengths and capabilities, and that their communities have many resources and assets, and that it's identifying and connecting and leveraging and building on and building up those strengths and assets. That is how we can build the power of people and communities to chart and shape their own futures. Now, this doesn't mean just ignoring problems or gaps or needs. It's really more for me about where we start and where we focus. Because when our focus is on the problems and needs, which, as we all know, is unfortunately a more common approach to people in communities impacted by poverty, those problems and needs can be magnified and reinforced, while the strengths and assets can be ignored or even become invisible. And this leads to hopelessness and powerlessness in communities, to over-reliance on external resources, to service providers seeing themselves as saviors, while the community capabilities and assets go ignored and untapped. As VISTA members, your core mission, of course, is to build capacity, to empower communities, and to contribute to sustainable community change. Both research and experience tell us that you're more likely to succeed in that mission when you focus on and build from the assets and strengths of the people and communities you engage with, through collaboration rooted in self-determination and empowerment. So that's my perspective, and it sounds like many of you share it. So in addition to thinking, when you start planning community engagement, in addition to thinking about who is that community that you want or need to engage, you'll also need clarity about the purpose or goals of your engagement. If you're hoping to involve your community in informing or making decisions like planning or program feedback, something called the community engagement triangle can be useful in thinking through your goal or goals. And it is a triangle where you might place your community engagement initiative anywhere on it, depending on the mix of what you hope to accomplish, based on the 3 points of the triangle being informing decisions, so providing opportunities for communities to contribute to or to do decision making, strengthening relationships, which we heard a lot about, building new relationships or improving existing relationships with or within communities, and sharing knowledge on a particular topic or issue, building the collective capacity to address it. This model was originally put together by a consulting group in Australia, but it's been since widely used around the world. And just last year, actually, the consulting group put out a revision of their original triangle. In the original version, that goal on the bottom left of sharing knowledge was called capacity building. Yeah, reciprocity is important. This group recognized that they had initially thought about that goal as outsiders teaching or building the capacity of community members. And over time, they came to recognize, reflecting a more asset
Hey, Sarah, I think your audio may have dropped. Don't know if you can hear me at the moment, but sorry, everyone. Just give this a second to see if Sarah can come back, but if not, we'll certainly continue on. So just looking, and look, I know Sarah was in the middle of a
I'm back.
There you go.
Sorry, I am so sorry. Oh boy.
No worries.
So yes, I was about to tell a story here about something that I was involved in a few years back that really was more about moving people to action. It's a community organizing group that I'm part of that wanted to engage large numbers of people to participate in what we call precinct caucuses in Minnesota that we hold at the beginning of state election years. We also wanted to learn about those people's deepest concerns, and we wanted in the process to build up the leadership of our members, which is pretty much always the case for community organizers. So given those goals and what we knew about our people, we decided to train our members to invite people that they knew to come to their homes or places of worship for a structured conversation designed with our goals in mind. And at the end of each conversation, the hosts would ask their invitees to consider hosting their own such conversation, and some accepted, which expanded the circle of who was invited into the conversations and into precinct caucuses. Ultimately, we held hundreds of these meetings, and in addition to achieving our goals of getting lots of people to participate in precinct caucuses and building up our members' leadership, we were able to bring together the concerns we heard from participants into sort of an overarching agenda for our organization, which was an unexpected outcome that has continued to be a powerful tool for us to this day. So I'm going to turn it back to Chris again for another chat about your goals.
Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, before we move on, we do have another question for you for the chat. So before, in our previous chat question, we asked why community engagement matters for you or for your project. Now, we would like you to take a minute to reflect on where you are in your VISTA project and what do you want to engage your community to do. So reflecting on where you're at in your project and where you're at during your year of service. So what do you want to engage your community to do? For example, you might want them to provide input in a planning process, or maybe feedback on a program or a proposal. You may want them to become volunteers. We saw that quite a bit in the earlier responses, or storytellers or trainers, or maybe to contribute money or to engage others. We saw in the initial chat question, there was some mentions of grants and funding. Or you may want them to participate in making some kind of a decision. So what do you want to engage your community to do? And again, we'll just give it a few, good 30 seconds or so to make sure everyone gets a chance to respond. And we'll try to look through some of these responses as they come in. I already see a few coming in, and thanks to everyone. So just looking through, kind of scrolling through, there's a challenge in engaging volunteers. But community agencies invested is really the need to provide job and volunteering opportunities for recent college graduates specifically. Scrolling down, Christopher is 11 days into my first VISTA year. First off, congrats, Christopher, on swearing in 11 days ago. That's very cool. But mentions that they want to engage the community to be innovators of change and growth and education, financial literacy, and the arts. Love it. I love it. Encouraging community members to consider volunteer service. Absolutely. Participating in monthly volunteering events. As Lina, 6 months in, provide input in the planning and programming for a new youth sports complex and teen or community center. Engaging community with science and STEM, not just in our park, but in our own neighborhoods. Absolutely. Seen some mentions of those, quite a few in there around halfway through their year of service. I do also see a couple mentioning during their second year of VISTA service. Love to see it. Cindy mentions a web-based resource for community members to look for resources and benefits. Love it, and definitely encourage you to scroll through and look through these responses. Again, Sarah, I'll definitely ask you as you're scrolling through as well, if you see any that really stand out that you notice here.
Well, I mean, one thing I noticed really is there's a big range of folks here. Folks who are just getting started, don't yet have the kind of clarity they need to fully answer the question. Others who have multiple answers, and folks who are thinking about people for planning, for implementation, for really expanding their programs. Yeah, this is a great range, both of the kinds of goals that we're talking about, and also, some people are just starting to figure it out, and that's as it should be.
Agreed. And I'll just note that I'll pass it back to Sarah, and we're going to move on, but we will come back to your answers to this specific question later on. So keep your answers in mind to this question for a bit later. But yeah, I'll pass it back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. And now that you're thinking about sort of the who that you want to engage and your goals for engagement, some folks with more clarity than others at this point, we're going to touch on some of the many tools and strategies that you might use to engage your community, depending on who they are and what it is you hope to engage them to do. Now, honestly, there's essentially endless possible ways to engage communities with variations to fit your goals, your community, your capacity. And some of these tools can be very familiar, like surveys. I mean, if you've visited a website or a chain store or the post office, you've likely been asked to respond to an online feedback survey. Or maybe like me, you've been in a restroom that offered you a one-tap opportunity to rate its condition. Surveys can be written, they can be oral, they can be physical, like sticky dots on a poster. When you want structured input, like yes or no, or which of these three options, or what can we do to improve, some variation of a survey might be the way to go. You need to think about lots of things, logistics, accessibility, and so on, to make a survey work for your situation. But surveys certainly one tool that we have in our toolbox. Another that's probably less familiar is called community mapping, sometimes called an asset mapping, but it's really been broadened out over time to be called community mapping. It's a participatory process. There's many versions of it, but you've got community members physically mapping things like community assets, historical events, possible futures. It's interactive and it's graphic and it can be fun, and it can be a useful way to initiate dialogue or planning or visioning. It can be useful for folks who are new in a community, and it can be useful to experience different perspectives in a community. Another strategy that can be a great approach, especially for like a geographically defined community, is go door to door to talk with people. Maybe it's you out introducing yourself and your program, or maybe it's a team of community members who are asking their neighbors a set of questions to understand what they want for their community, or to discover what talents they have, or to invite them to check out your program. When I worked for a neighborhood organization, I spent a lot of time doing this. Many different ways, but in the very beginning, the first thing I was doing was walking through the doors of businesses on a key corridor and introducing myself and getting to know them and their business and their concerns before I went to the next step of inviting them to a gathering to talk about what we might do together. You might also, and I saw some of you talking about this, pop up a booth or a table or a career fair in a busy public location or at a community event, and offer simple and fun ways for people to learn about your project or to have their say. This can be a good way of allowing people to contribute or to obtain information at their own convenience. You'd usually have someone on hand to chat with people, some materials, something visual or fun for visitors to do, or ways for them to have their say. Maybe you got treats or stickers or some other inexpensive way to slow people down and draw them in. My hot tip for tabling, if you have the opportunity, is to have a way to engage kids, because often that'll help you draw in adults and also just create some energy around your table or your booth. We've also got house meetings or kitchen table meetings as a way for involved community members to engage others who are in their relationship networks, like in the example I talked about earlier. They invite people they know to their home or another safe space to be engaged. They might simply just be a host and introduce you or someone else to make a presentation or solicit input, or they might be supported, as in my example, in actually presenting information themselves and in making a pitch to attendees to join them in volunteering or otherwise getting involved in what you're doing. This is a pretty tried and true community engagement and organizing strategy that builds on existing relationships. Another strategy that you may have seen, a lot of times government agencies or maybe even your VISTA project might create a working group or advisory committee. They often are given, a specific charge and a timeline, facilitation or other kind of logistical support. The membership is usually tasked or usually specifically chosen to bring, whatever kind of experience or knowledge or expertise is needed, or to balance different perspectives on an issue. They generally are tasked with making recommendations for action that could be more or less binding on the organization that created the group. This strategy definitely requires invested community members willing to really put in real time, some supporting resources, and definitely clarity about decision-making power and authority. To what extent are these recommendations ones that you are committed to acting on? This is just a small slice of the universe of tools and strategies that can be used for community engagement. And there'll be many more that you'll be able to find in some of the resources for further learning that we'll offer a bit later. We said that in the VISTA context, community engagement means involving and centering community members in planning, carrying out, and sustaining VISTA projects. Actually, I said that. Over the course of a project's life cycle, or even over the course of your year of service. What kind of community engagement is needed, and the roles that community members might play will evolve and change. For example, if you're just getting started, you might set up a series of meetings with community members to assess the existing situation, working with them to map or catalog existing programs and potential partners. Or you might want to recruit a community advisory team to work with you on project design and planning. If, on the other hand, you've got a program that's up and running and your aim is to strengthen or expand it, you might want to work with, for example, past or current participants to plan and carry out a feedback survey for improvement, or to form an outreach team to go door to door to promote the program in the community. Or you might form a community leadership team and work with them to host house meetings where they invite people they know to become volunteers. Later in the project cycle, if your project has built a strong base of community support and involvement, you might work with a team of committed community members to design and carry out a strategic planning workshop, or to research and present a proposal for how the program can continue after VISTA support comes to a close. So, got lots of great ideas here. All that sounds great, but of course, community engagement isn't always easy. There can be many challenges to effective community engagement. There are some that are perhaps more obvious practical challenges that can arise, starting with the always challenge of time. As we know, people lead busy lives, especially people experiencing poverty. They've got many time constraints. So how much time will your engagement take? What day and time would work for your community? And there's language, whether we're talking about like English or Spanish, or like formal or academic versus familiar language. And don't forget location. Are you asking people to come to you, or are you going to them? Is the location familiar? Is it safe? Can they bring kids? Will there be food? I know that one organization that I know in St. Paul, Minnesota, called the West Side Community Organization. I've really seen them grow. They're a great example of an organization that builds community engagement events that work for their community, addressing these kinds of challenges. And of course, there are challenges related to power dynamics. How risky might it feel for people you serve to give you or your organization critical feedback? How can you make it safer? If you're bringing people together, who will feel comfortable speaking their truth? In front of whom? Is their boss in the room? You know, you may want, for example, different groups or opportunities for people of different positions, different races and ethnicities, or genders or generations. I know back in the day, Minneapolis Public Schools had a really successful parent engagement program that their model had parents engaging at tables with others from their own ethnic or racial community before then sharing across communities. We all make choices about how we invest our time and energy. Why should community members choose to invest in engaging with you or your organization? What's the benefit or incentive for them? Too often, we expect community members to share their expertise and time without them receiving any benefit. And there can be lots of different kinds of benefits. Sometimes finding a way to add a social benefit or a material incentive can help address this challenge. And like anything that matters, community engagement requires resources. Limited resources can be a challenge, whether those resources are time or relationships or engaged people, or the kinds of things that money can pay for, like technology or space or language interpretation. If we value community engagement, we have to find the resources to support it. And I wanted to show you just a quick example of how resources can be used to address some challenges in community engagement. It's something that just came into my inbox just as I was working on this. It's an invitation to engagement from a healthcare organization. They have resources and they're putting significant resources into a community engagement process. In this case, what they're doing is engaging business owners as they're developing their supplier diversity program. And some of what I saw here that impressed me was the clear invitation to join with clarity about the purpose and also the promise that they'll be kept informed of how their input's being used as well as what's happening. There's a consulting group that's implementing the process for them, which can help with trust or power challenges, in addition to taking it off the plate of people who already have full-time jobs. And there's multiple opportunities to participate at a time that works with a stipend for participation that's noted right up front. Now, I know that most of our organizations and projects don't have that kind of budget, but it is an example of how resources can be used to address challenges to effective community engagement. So I'm going to pass it over to Chris for a chat question about one additional very important challenge to effective community engagement.
Thanks, Sarah. And yes, an important challenge indeed it is. So another challenge is trust. So let's talk about this together quickly. Please put in the chat any answers you have about how trust might be a common challenge in community engagement. So this might be institutional, trust of systems or organizations. It could be personal, trust of you or another key individual at the project. So again, this will probably be a quick chat question, but just want to get you thinking about trust issues. And I know we'll hear from Sarah in a second to dive into this a bit more right after this, but want to see your responses. Already see some coming in. Looks like being an outsider within a community group, Sigron, yes, absolutely. If you're an issue, if you're not from the area, they may see you as an outsider, absolutely. And that, that could be if you, we have many VISTAs who relocate to a new area, but that can also be if you're working, if you didn't relocate, you can still be seen as an outsider at times, for sure. Working in a small rural town, and it's hard to gain trust as an outsider, seeing, yeah, similar responses in that regard. Wow, okay, yeah, they're coming in fast here. Let's see, previous poor leadership. That is a great response, Larson. Yeah, that could lead to a lack of trust. Native communities with historical trauma from outside organizations and government. Absolutely, absolutely. Yearly turnover in the AmeriCorps position. From great response, Whitney, that can absolutely lead to it, and something we should absolutely note and address. Power dynamics addressed here, yes. Competition for same volunteers and participants, that's an excellent response, Lily. Varying agendas. Let's see. Going through, and I know Sarah's going to touch on this a bit more, but please keep these responses coming. These are excellent responses. Sarah, I'll pass it to you. I know you're going to touch on this, and if any of stood out, by all means, please note.
Yeah. Boy, there's a lot of good things here. I mean, I think in general, if we're talking about communities who are impacted by poverty, this idea of, historical trauma and repeated injustices over time will build lack of trust. And I would say, in addition to that, often previous attempts at community engagement that felt disingenuous, where it felt like they made the decision they were going to make anyway, can really be a big trust challenge if you're trying to do community engagement in particular. And, I think broken promises, oh, funny, I just see something just came into the Q&A as I was saying the words, broken promises destroy trust. And I think for me, far too often, communities have been asked to contribute their ideas or their knowledge or opinions, and then never heard what came of it, or saw actions taken that appeared to ignore what they had to say. And I think we'll go to the next slide to talk a little bit about one way to build trust as you do community engagement is to pay attention to the promise that you're making, whether that's explicitly or implicitly, and keeping those promises. So what I'm going to show you here is it's a spectrum on community engagement. It was created by the International Association for Public Participation, IAP2. It's a widely known and used framework, and one that I find particularly useful if you want to move your community engagement in the direction of increasing community agency and power. This is built specifically for the kinds of engagement called public participation that focus on decision making. And notice the arrow going across the slide near the top, indicating increasing community impact on the decision. For each of these modes of participation that we're going to fill in here, I'm going to read the goal and the promise to the public we make when we engage them. So the first mode is inform. And the goal here is to provide the public with balanced and objective information and to assist them in understanding the problem, the alternatives, the opportunities, or the solution. And this is really the promises that will keep you informed. This is essentially one-way communication. Here's what's happening. The next level is consult. And the goal here is to obtain public feedback on analysis, alternatives, and or decisions. So like, here are some options. What do you think? The promise to the public here is that we will keep you informed, listen to and acknowledge concerns and aspirations, and provide feedback on how public input influenced the decision. Very important. With involve, the goal is to work directly with the public throughout the process to ensure that public concerns and aspirations are consistently understood and considered. You know, here's a problem. What ideas do you have? The promise here to the public is that we'll work with you to ensure that your concerns and aspirations are directly reflected in the alternatives developed, and again, provide feedback on how your input influenced the decision. With collaborate, the goal is to partner with the public in each aspect of the decision-making, including the development of alternatives and the identification of the preferred solution. So it's like, let's work together to solve this problem. The promise is that we will look to you for advice and innovation in formulating solutions and incorporate your advice
Sarah, I think the sound went out again. Yeah, seeing it in the chat as well. So we'll give it a second on the technical difficulties. Apologies, everyone, about it. But I know Sarah was addressing the aspect of the promise to the public here, where, oh, there you go.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Funny, yeah. I didn't realize I didn't disappear this time. Sorry you couldn't hear me.
Oh,
but yes,
thanks.
That's right. The last one, the promise is that we will implement what you decide, which is a pretty big promise. And this probably most often happens in the context that's like, you're already working on this. How can we help? So to bring it all together, to choose an engagement strategy that fits, you're going to think about the goals. What are strategies that get what you want out of your engagement? The community. What strategies will fit with your community? What do you need to take into account? Trust, culture, logistics. What kind of customizations or creative approaches might work for your situation? And then capacity or resources. Who's your team? What do you have to work with? Do you have volunteers, community champions, participants eager to help? Are there physical program sites or existing community communications vehicles you can use? And what about the readiness of your organization? Are they prepared to collaborate or share power with community? Or is informing or consulting more realistic? Now we're going to move into an activity with Chris.
Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, now let's take a break here to collaborate. In just a moment, we will share a link in the chat for you to select and open up a Jamboard. This will enable us to share some ideas in real time to the prompt that we'll show you in just a second. So when you open up the Jamboard, you can add a sticky note with your response by selecting the sticky note icon on the left side of the screen. You see it circled here in blue on the screen. If the Jamboard page you're viewing is filling up, you can select the page arrow at the top of the page to switch to a different blank page. I think there's 10 different pages you can use to add these sticky notes. So also a note, there is a capacity in this Jamboard of 100 being on the page, 100 participants at one time. We have about 175 on this webinar. So If you get in there and add your note, we ask you to exit out just to allow someone to come back in. We're going to be sharing the screen so that you can see all responses. But with that being said, what we want to do is for you to think back to the earlier chat question, asking where you are in your project and what you want to engage your community to do. One of the chat questions we had earlier. On the Jamboard, please enter in what you want your community to engage in and a tool you will use to make that happen. Again, the link is in the chat. Steve just shared it. As a reminder to share your comment, again, select the sticky note icon from the left toolbar. You can see on the screen, it's circled in blue here. After typing your response, select save, which will post your sticky note for everyone to see. We'll give it a couple of minutes. I'll be quiet for a good 30 seconds for you to gather your thoughts and get your response in. We'll come back and look at some of the ideas that you've shared. And again, we do ask that once you have added your thoughts, please exit the Jamboard to allow others to get in, as only 100 participants can be in the Jamboard at one time. So we'll continue screen sharing so you can hear everyone's answers, and I'll come back in about 30 seconds. A friendly reminder, seen a bunch of stickies being posted to please exit out, just close out of the browser tab once you've completed, just to allow others to enter. Sorry about that, but there is the capacity of 100 participants there at a time. But we'll give it just a little more time, and I'll come back in just a second. Seeing a bunch come in. Let me remind you as well to use the tab at the very top. You see where it says 1 of 10. See the page kind of filling up a little bit. So if you want a blank page, you can use a little toggle towards the top to go to another page. But loving the responses. Please keep them coming in. And this is also a link that we will share for you to view and add responses as well, to see from your colleagues. And some really good ones coming in, and definitely encourage you to look through it. I know we saw some chat responses where you aren't able to get in quite yet. I apologize again for that, but hopefully very soon you can. As you see on the screen, we have some good ones. We have community newspaper tool, writing micro stories, encouraging community to engage in future STEM learning and careers. We can provide resources and a positive introduction to STEM as a tool to help. Giving space to contribute input. I think it's best if I utilize surveys, door-to-door interactions, and advisory committees. More understanding and support for justice impacted people to come back. giving those who want to change their lives a second chance and more acceptance and care or donations. Seeing mention of finding farmers, to go to a website to research and make cold calls to them and ask for volunteers for our school gardens. Love it, and I'm seeing them come in fast and furious. In the interest of time, we may have to move on because we do have a couple of questions we want to get to and want to get to our review question. Please keep these coming. I would also, again, encourage you, since this page is filling up, you know, to go to the top if you need to. I see one person has done so, where you can just toggle to the right and go to a new page to add your sticky. But thanks so much. Yeah, as you see, thanks, Dylan. Sarah, I'll pass it back to you really quickly before we get to our review question. And yeah, thanks for the participation, everyone.
Yeah, lots of good stuff here. The last thing I wanted to say before we get to the review question is I just wanted to let you know that there is a tool that we'll be sharing with you that is a planning tool that is meant for working with a team to try to answer all these questions together to create a strategy that's going to fit. They have an example that's in there, but there's a blank that you can use with your own team, and that'll be in the resources we share.
Thanks, Sarah. And so if we take a quick moment for a review, so in just a moment, a poll should pop up on your screen, and we have a scenario here. So the scenario, your VISTA project is building the capacity of a food bank to provide locally sourced, culturally appropriate foods for your city. You want to build relationships with recent immigrant communities and learn about their food preferences. So the question we have here is, which engagement strategy would you choose? Out of the option of 4, you have written survey, you have pop-ups at immigrant community events, working group or advisory committee, or door-to-door interactions. So you should see the poll pop up, hopefully. Do see several already responding. Thank you so much. I'll be quiet for a good 15 seconds to make sure everyone gets a chance to respond, and just hit submit, and I'll come right back. Okay, it does look like the responses are slowing down. So a quick, about a 3-second warning in case you haven't clicked submit before we check out our answer, and let's check it out. The correct answer here is B, and great job. So 60% of you got that correct. So a written survey would likely be a challenge. If you selected A, a written survey could be a challenge for newer immigrant communities, even with translation resources, and would not directly build relationships. A working group or advisory committee requires a greater investment of time from those being engaged than makes sense for this scenario. And while door-to-door interactions could work well for the city as a whole, unless you know specifically where members of newer immigrant communities live, hearing from them and building relationships with them would be more effectively achieved by going to where you're more likely to find them. For that reason, B is the correct answer here. So thank you so much for your participation. And quickly, here's a brief recap of what we discussed in today's webinar. So we looked at what community engagement is and identified asset-based strategies you can use to engage with your community. And as you are planning for your community engagement, We would encourage you to check out the sites mentioned on this screen for further information on the topics we covered today. You'll be able to access all of these links in the handout we've shared in the chat, and we'll also follow up tomorrow by email with the handouts as well, and they'll be posted to the campus. Again, as a friendly reminder, before we wrap this up, we will continue to post all of these recordings of the monthly webinars and the handouts to the VISTA campus. We'll have this in a couple of days, likely by tomorrow, midday-ish probably. You'll just need to navigate to the campus at learn.americorps.gov and log in. Once logged in, you can click on Catalog, where you see the red square on the screen. That will bring you to the learning paths available. There's a whole bunch of them. Under Catalog, since there's a bunch of learning paths, you can filter by members if easier. On the left-hand side, there's some filters. These webinar recordings will be posted to the appropriate learning path. If it's your first time accessing it, you have to enroll and join the learning path, but that's easy. It's just a couple of clicks. And once you've joined, you can browse through all of the available recorded webinars at your leisure. The recording to today's webinar on community engagement will be posted under the project development learning path in the campus catalog. And again, we'll send a notice out once it's posted. Please also take a couple of moments to give us feedback on this webinar. We do constantly review the content and we try to make it better for future members. So we want to know how we can improve the presentation, what worked, what didn't. We thank you in advance for your feedback. You should see Steve just dropped a link in the chat for the survey, and it should pop up in your browser as you exit Zoom as well. We just have a couple of slides left, and Sarah, looks like we have about three questions in the queue. I don't know. I know we only have about a minute, and we can up by an answer for any questions, but just wanted to get your input on these.
Yep, I was starting to type because I didn't know if we'd have time. Annika, we should connect because I don't have a quick answer for the alternatives questions. I need to know a little bit more what you're trying to do. But I did, Elizabeth asked about how do we engage stakeholders that might not be focused on the same things we are. And as a community organizer, the thing is to figure out what they do care about and how do those things connect. And there may be relationships that you can use to help move that person. As Laura asked about, some advice from the community will not be constructive and not used. You should always be as clear as you can from the get-go. What can you promise? What can't you? What are the constraints? What's open for debate and what's not? That will certainly always be the case. Thanks, Annika. So I think those are the two I can answer quickly.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah. Those are the only two I saw, but if you are mid-typing a question, feel free to continue typing it, putting it in the Q&A, and we can either try to address it by typing an answer after we conclude here, or can follow up afterwards as well. But thank you so much for attending the webinar. We hope you can join us for next month's webinar, which is titled Approaching Project and Community Work with Humility. It'll be next month, Wednesday, April 26th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And just quickly showing you where you can register for that April webinar. If you go to the VISTA campus at learn.americorps.gov and just click calendar at the top in the main menu, a blue or green dot will indicate an event for that day. So just look for April 26th. You'll see the description appear below and the link to register for the webinar. So we hope to see you there. And a big thank you for your participation today. Thank you for serving as an AmeriCorps VISTA member, for stepping up and serving your communities. It is so appreciated, and we love all the work that you do, and just want to send that big thanks, especially right coming off of AmeriCorps Week too. We just missed AmeriCorps Week for this webinar, but please know that your work is appreciated. You are appreciated. We wish you all the success in the world. We hope to see you next month. This will conclude today's webinar. Again, we'll follow up with an email tomorrow, but you feel free to log off. But thank you again for your service.